We are also ensuring that the government does not continue to manage this refinery, because government is not really equipped to manage refinery.
We need to come forward and do something different, so that we move from a situation of looking at things from it's purely a consumptive approach to a productive environment.
The government and the people need to really agree on the need for a departure from business as usual.
We are now on a process of recovery. It is what I call a bumpy journey to an uncertain destination.
This is Moneyline with me, Nancy Naji. It's so nice to know that you're joining us again today.
There's no point having all of this data if you are unwilling. I'm using my words advisedly here. No, I didn't say unable, but unwilling to enforce. But having said that, that reactivity rather than proactivity is a problem. It's a problem that we keep coming back to in terms of the way we handle government-related activities in this country. We need to be proactive about doing stuff, about counting Nigerians, about knowing where Nigerians are. We need to be proactive. We need a complete mindset shift. The key things that we need to look at in terms of data protection is the human error and punishing people who, for political differences or whatever, outbreak to break data protection laws. We have a cybercrime act. Data protection ought to be a thing. We have these things where people basically behave like hooligans because they have access to information. It shouldn't be.
Welcome back. I spoke with Ngozi Okafor, who is an author and a content creator as well as an investor. So she's the author of A Guide to Property Investment. And we spoke about property investing in Nigeria and perhaps why you need to beware. I said it during the program also. In the year 2022 that I see that a lot of schemes, pyramid schemes or Ponzi schemes are also coming out as property investment. So you've got to be careful. Not to say that there are no other genuine investments in property that you can take advantage of, but Ngozi Okafor really highlighted some of the tips that you need to take a look at when investing in property and why it is important for us to start investing in properties, and that you can do that in several ways. You mustn't have millions of naira to start investing in that. Just take a listen to the show in case you missed it, and in case you saw it, I think it was one of the shows that we got good reviews to in the year 2022 and a lot of feedback. So take a listen to that and I'll be right back. Let's get started. While I was doing the introduction earlier on, I did say that the notion of property investment now is getting increasingly popular. And I like it because I'm part of those at least that were canvassing many years ago. I get to do shows on property investment, mortgage banking, mortgage and all of that. Our mortgage culture here, we don't really have it and all of that. So I'm quite happy that it's getting increasingly popular. Yes. Why is it getting increasingly popular? What happened? Because this is your area. I'm happy it's getting popular, but why is it getting popular? What just happened? What just happened?
Well, I think it's a good question, and there are probably a few answers to that. One of the things that I think about is the fact that when it comes to investing, property is the easiest thing to get into. And what I mean by that is, unlike, for instance, digital assets, people feel like they need to know a lot about technology to be able to trade on digital assets. Then you've got stocks in a company, which require you to have, yes, some business savvy, so that you can understand from when you read a report on a company what they're likely to do in the next 5 to 10 years. So it requires you to be interested in, those types of companies, pharmaceuticals, technology, or apps. But with property, you really just need to know a couple of things, and you're ready to get into the property market. So I think the popularity is because when you look at the different ways that we have to invest, especially now that the amount of money you get back from treasury bills is not as high. It doesn't make sense for people to leave their money in their bank account at 1 or 2% when they could invest in property and get back like a 20% return. So I think the ease of investing in property, the lack of options that are as lucrative as property, and then when we look at things like stocks that are as lucrative, it requires so much knowledge that people don't generally have, and so property is a way to get into investing without doing too much research in terms of business, having too much knowledge, and then it's something that you can just start if you have some money.
That having not to, if you don't have too much knowledge, if you don't have too much knowledge in terms of property investing, is it a bad thing? Because I know, I'm not saying it's always been there, because if someone has money now, the first thing is like, okay, let me secure myself and buy a home. Then I'll start thinking of buying other homes or building other houses for rent to become a landlord or a landlady. So what I'm trying to say in essence is that the right information. Does property investing also entail you having the right information? Even though you said other forms of investing, you've got to know it, you've got to show interest. But it's like, so, but is there still an essence for you to have the right information and do your research? Is there still an essence for you to have the right information?
That's why I wrote a book about property. If I didn't think that, I believe so, because that's why I wrote a book about property. If I didn't think that people needed to know stuff, then there'd be no point in writing it. But the benefit that we have with property is that by the time you get to being an investor, you've obviously lived in houses. So you kind of know how houses work. You know how to maintain one, you know possibly what it costs to purchase one or what it costs to rent one. And so for anyone who, even when you're not going out of your way to build up that information, you're getting the knowledge because you know how much your landlord is charging you for rent, for instance. Or you might know how much houses are being sold in your area or how much you purchased this one. So you do need knowledge, but not to the extent that people in other fields, in terms of if you're investing in digital assets or if you're investing in a company's stocks, not to that extent. So what I write about in my book is the knowledge that you need to work with somebody who's going to do the construction on your behalf. Because there are things that happen during construction, people cut corners, and if you don't know, then you're going to have a situation where in future you've got, a house that's cracking or water damage coming through. There's a bit of business in there because you need to calculate your return on investment. So if you're investing in property, like any other investment, you need it to return a certain amount, a certain percentage of what you've put in there. So knowing how to calculate once you see a property, is this worth investing in? Will I get my return on investment? Will I get 10%? Will I get 20% return? So that sort of basic mathematics and basic return on investment calculation, you definitely need to have. So that when you see a deal, you can quickly calculate if it's worth it for you to get involved in that deal. Because obviously not a lot of real estate purchases would be profitable. Not a lot of real estate investment makes money. Sometimes you can lose money. So the knowledge of how to calculate whether something is an investment or not is good. The knowledge of how to work with tradespeople, artisans, an engineer and an architect, that's also good. The knowledge about what's happening in the building materials market in terms of the quality of things things that are available, as well as, you know, the different cons that could happen, can quite save you quite a bit of money. So you do need knowledge. The knowledge, I believe so, definitely. And obviously that's why I've written the book, to give people that knowledge. But bad or as intense as the amount of knowledge you would need for other types of investments.
Is property investing really profitable? Let's dissect it here. Yeah, and I know you understand what I'm saying. If it's really as profitable as people think, is it really profitable?
I would say yes.
Really,
and the reason why I'd say yes is because I'll give you some examples.
And I know
of
you
where
understand what I'm saying.
If you're able to purchase property, for instance, there's some low-cost housing schemes that go on from time to time. There was one that my friend purchased, and she had bought it for 8 million. 2 years later, she was renting the place out for 1 million, which means that after 8 years, any rent that she gets on the property is pure profit. Yes, and this is assuming she doesn't increase the rent in that 8 years. Other people have purchased. I've purchased property where after purchasing it, because the developer did such a fantastic job and the area is so popular, before we even finish the property or move in, it's doubled in price, right? So if you wanted to sell it, you automatically make 100%. So in property, and there's so many areas of property, not just the buying and the selling. They're brokers. You know, we helped somebody sell a plot of land just a month ago, and just the brokers who are in between, one of them, his only role was to text somebody and say, I have this land available, are you interested? And the person responds, and from that he gets 2 million from sending a text message. He didn't have to leave his house, he didn't have to get dressed or do anything special. But over time, he's built the contacts that he can text people and say, I have something in this price range, do you have a client? And then, so he's a broker and he's introducing to people. And for that text, he gets 2 million. So there are a lot of other roles within property development and investing that isn't buying and building of houses. And there's money in every single stage of property investing.
Okay, so let's talk about those ways, because I'm interested in those other ways whereby you can make money. You've just said one. Are there other ways?
Well, I mean, in terms of the industry itself, it's like everything else. Like I keep looking at brands that are online e-commerce stores. And I think, where's the e-commerce store for property? Where you can buy building materials, right? And then you know that the quality of what you're buying is good and is not fake. And you also know that the company is reliable. So if you make payment, they will deliver you good things. We don't have that. So there are gaps in the market. I look at all the fintechs that are starting up and all the funding that they're getting, but there's several gaps in our fintech, in tech market for property, right? Things like design apps that we don't have yet, rental apps that we don't have yet, doing background checks on new tenants. We're missing so many apps in that area. We don't have, like I said, the e-commerce store. We don't actually have a variety. Like when you look at it, you know, I have to develop property every few weeks. And I'm looking at stuff like tiles. And it's the same tiles that you're going to see in every single house.
Yes.
But we don't even have the variety of, you know, choice. Like, oh, these are some fantastic tiles, let's buy this. It's almost like the same buyer buys tiles for the entire country. Yeah, so I feel like there are gaps. And then some of the things that we use in building, the quality of it is so low, it's almost as if they're props. You know, in a movie set, you have to use props. They're not designed for actual use. They're just there to look like they're usable. A lot of the things that we bring in look like and function like props. After 6 to 9 months, they break and they're no longer working.
And you go buy the same thing
and you go buy again. And so I feel like we have a gap within, you know, building materials markets that hasn't even been looked at. People can capitalize on that. In terms of the property itself, you've got things like house hacking, which, you know, I think people do it, but they're not familiar with the fact that that's what they're doing.
What's house hacking?
And it's when you have a house that has either a BQ or a separate entrance somewhere, so you're living there and you're renting out the other spaces. Now, this is something that I did when I was in university, and it helped me. Then I was in the UK and I had a mortgage. It helped me pay my mortgage because the people who were renting rooms from me were paying the mortgage. You also have the option of doing that in Nigeria. I think Lekki is somewhere where they do that really well, where you've got the gatehouse is a store, downstairs is something else, upstairs is something else, and people are able to live in their house, either rent it out on like online, you know, daily booking websites, or rent it out to a long-term tenant. A lot of people are doing it here in Abuja as well. So if you have access to a family house, for instance, and your siblings have moved and gotten married, and you're living there by yourself, you're able to renovate some rooms and put it on a platform where you make money every day for having your rooms available that people can rent. Another option is to do the house hacking. So when you rent out the place, people who are living there end up paying for the rent and even sometimes the utilities, right? And that's by splitting up where you're living. So house hacking is an option for people who don't have any money, but they want to start getting into real estate. It's something they can do. And there's also something called rent to rent, where you rent from the landlord in order to re-rent it out, right? Now, this might change if the laws change, but in general, if you rent from a landlord and you pay 1 year's rent, you can then rent it out to people who are paying monthly, right? We have a lot of international people who come from the, different countries. They're not, some of them are not allowed to pay annual rents. They have to pay monthly rents, but they're happy to pay in dollars and they're happy to pay a high amount. So if you rent something for a year, then you can re-rent it to those people. Obviously, you've got to make
as if the landlord agrees.
That's right. So in general, you can speak to a landlord, right? People always say that. On my social media platforms, when I share about all the things that are possible, people say things like, oh, the landlord. As if the landlord is a non-human entity. The landlord is a person. So if you say to the landlord, this is what I want to do, and they say to you, oh, these are my concerns, you can address those concerns, and then you can offer to pay them a bit more than what they're going to
because
get.
you've got to give the landlord an incentive.
Yes.
Because if not, the landlord will think, you want to use my house
and
to make money.
Exactly.
I'm the one that built it and all
Exactly.
of that. So you've got to incentivize the landlord or the landlady.
Yes. So we did that on one of the properties that we renovated. The landlord, prior to us coming in, they were getting about 700. It was a 3-bedroom house, or it is a 3-bedroom house, and we converted it. The back had space, so we built a 1-bedroom BQ, and then we converted the 3-bedroom house into a maisonette, an upstairs apartment and a downstairs apartment. And from them getting 700 a year, we were able to get them at 3.2 a year, because the one house was converted into 3 units and we upgraded the place. So now for the landlord, they're getting significantly more than what they had before. So it's good for them. And then for the person who's doing the rent to rent, is good for them also, because they have access to an income without owning the asset, without owning the property. They still make money from a property they don't own.
I see one of my cameramen is doing like this. You want to ask a question? It's getting interesting, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about this, which I mentioned earlier. That we're seeing a lot of supposedly real estate investments. But actually, they are Ponzi schemes when you look through. I don't know, you must have, this is your field, because they tell me. How would you be able to identify it quickly? Fantastic. Because I see that many Nigerians are falling prey to it. They are on television, on radio, and all of that.
Yes.
How do you identify a genuine property investment, even to secure a home for yourself and also for investment?
Okay. That's a fantastic question, and it's a very important topic. The reason is, like you said, a lot of people are falling into these schemes, right? And I met somebody once at an organization who said, she put money in MMM, and she was like, I lost all my money, and it was a Ponzi scheme, and I'm not interested in any Ponzi schemes. And I was like, it's interesting that she knows it's called a Ponzi scheme. And so Ponzi schemes are basically, the number one thing that you use to identify them is that they focus more on recruiting new members than they focus on the asset, whatever the asset is. So whether it's property or health food products or beauty products, their focus is on recruitment. And once an organization is more focused on getting new people, you need to step back and look a little bit. So there's one in particular, they're very wealthy, and so they do a lot of billboards, TV ads, radio ads, and it's easy for you to get sucked in. But once you realize that the success in that organization means that you need to bring new people on to become marketers, then you know that there's a pyramid forming, right? Because the people at the bottom, a big group, you bring them in, the money they put in gets to the next level, and then the money they put in gets to the next, till you get to the top where there's just 1 or 2 people who are making the actual bulk. So when it comes to property, they did a good job at hiding it because in general, Ponzi schemes, there's no product. So when someone tells you bring your money and we'll double it, and you're like, what's the product? But there's no product. Straight away, you know it's a Ponzi scheme, right?
But this,
there's a product because there's a house.
Yes.
Yes, but there's still a scheme.
Yes.
So one of
And I
the
hope
things
Nigerians are learning from this because there's a product. You're like, okay, come and buy a house
Yes.
or pay for this.
Yes.
There's a product, so your mind will not really go. It's a Ponzi scheme outrightly.
Yes.
But for those that watch or that have glasses such as
Yes.
once you say like, oh,
You start, yes, you can tell. So one, looking at whether recruitment is a big deal there, right? And if people grow based on recruitment and the number of people who work under them, then obviously there's something going on in that organization. So the first elimination point is to see whether this company can stand on its own in terms of the products and services, can stand on their own without this heavy recruitment drive in the background. So when it comes to the property ones, they tend to try and recruit people who will sell the property, right? But in doing that, they kind of have designed it to also look like a pyramid scheme, which means that people have to go out and get other people who will sell. They have to make some payments for an initial pack. And you've got all these other payments that you have to make that are not necessarily connected to the property itself. So if you want to look at whether a deal is a good deal or not, or whether it's a Ponzi scheme, one of the things is to find out, first of all, who's organizing this? Is it a real estate company first? And then if it is a real estate company, what other jobs have they done in the past? So what other estates have they built? Once you're sure that you can see the estates that they've built, then you can ask them what your total payment is. So what tends to happen when we're borrowing money or when we're in a financial transaction, people don't tell you your total. They might tell you what the first payment is and what the subsequent payments are, but they don't tell you the total. And where that becomes a problem is something like interest rates. People can tell you, oh, it's 5% flat or it's 5% per annum. Knowing people don't know the difference between flat and per annum, you just think, oh, well, it's 5%.
Yeah.
But 5% flat is a massive annual fee. So when you look at what the annual charge is, you can then say, no, this is not for me because this is a fat payment that I'm going to be making. Like, this is a massive payment compared to what I thought it was. So again, with the property, they need to look at what is the total payment for this property, this plot, this building. When you have that information, then compare it to what the market is saying. So for instance, if you see a piece of land somewhere in Giri, do your research and find out if without this scheme, like people do schemes where they give you chicken and oil and all kinds of stuff to buy land. And my friends are telling me, oh, but there's a good deal. I was like, well, it depends, because if the land is overvalued, then all they've done is charged you to buy you the chicken and at their own rate.
Yes.
Right? Not
and
really.
if I can buy a land, I can
Well,
buy
I can
chicken.
buy chicken and I can buy oil.
And I can buy cow.
Yes. So don't get carried away by any deals that are around the property. Separate all that stuff. Take away all the emotions and look at the figures. How much is the plot? What is the size of the plot? And is this an actual realistic price? What is the interest rate? Yes.
Flat is different from annual.
Flat is completely different.
Please explain.
Yes. So when you charge the flat interest rate, it's the same interest rate every month, right? But you're paying 5%. So if you borrow, let's say 100 million or 100,000 or 100 naira, and it's 5%, you're paying, so let me use 100,000. You're going to be paying the 5,000 on the 100,000. At the end of the year, you've paid 60,000 in interest, as opposed to 5% per annum, which they'll then divide by 12. And then whatever the monthly amount is what you pay, so that at the...
Explain that.
So the whole idea is that you need to look for a good deal in the beginning. People just buy emotionally, like, you know, I like the area, or someone said it's really nice, or my friends live here, or it's a cool place, and they don't use their head, right? So they use their hearts and not their minds. And when they do that, chances are you're going to overpay for the property at the buying stage, which means that when it comes to sell, you're going to try and catch up for the overpayments you made during the buying stage. However, if you focus on making a better purchase, right, then when it comes time to sell, you've already almost made a profit on the day that you purchased the property, which is what I do. So any property that I buy already has value in it over what I'm paying. Now, that might be done because I'm negotiating. It might be because of the places where I go to buy the property. But I wouldn't just buy what is advertised at the price that is advertised at, because chances are that person obviously wants to make a profit and it's a little bit overpriced. So that when I'm coming to sell, if, let's say, for instance, I bought something that was 50 million, right? But the actual value is 45. I'm going to have to rely on when I'm selling to make back the 5 I lost in being a bad negotiator. But if I buy something that's 45 and I'm able to get it for 40, either because I'm able to identify when people are in distress and buy it on distress sale, or some connection between me and the seller so they didn't add on all the different fees that third parties would add on, then when I'm selling, I already have equity in this property, which means by tomorrow, if I want to sell it, I'm making money. And it takes a little bit of, and that's where the education comes in, a little bit of knowing what's going on in the market, in the area, for the size that you're looking for. But it's completely possible to buy property that already has equity in it because you bought it well, so that when the time comes to sell it, you already have equity. So you're making money when you buy, not when you sell, means that on the day that you sign the papers that you own this property, there should be equity in it. And it's really possible, all the property that I have, on the day of buying them, had equity in them, right? Some, a lot of equity in them, some, a fraction of equity. But it just means that no matter how bad the market gets, when it comes to selling, I should be able to cover what I bought the place for and a level of profit.
There's this notion that you never lose when you go property investing or when you buy a house for rent. Is it really true?
It's not true. I mean, it's like everything else in life.
That is so, it will appreciate. Either land flipping, you know, you buy a land for 5 million or 100,000, you want to sell it for 5 million. So that notion about you can't lose when you invest in property.
Well, people can definitely lose, and that usually happens again when you make the emotional decision when you're buying and you're not looking just at the numbers. But also, I'll give you another example that might not be as typical for everyone. But if you've lived overseas and you've lived in Nigeria, or for whatever reason conduct your life in both countries, then you can lose or definitely feel like you lost. And I'll give you an example. So there's a property that we had access to and we acquired in Katambe. And it was converted, we converted dollars to buy the property. And it's been over 10 years now. In order to get the dollars back, if we sell the property today, because of what our rate is,
Inflation
exchange rate,
and all that,
we're not going to get back what we put in, right?
Yeah.
Now, it's a problem for us because we have this dual nationality thing that we use to calculate things. But in general, if the person was just a Nigerian investor who didn't have to convert the money, it's still a problem because when that property was acquired,
inflation
it wasn't,
at a certain,
and it wasn't even acquired with that equity in it. And not having equity in it meant that already when you buy a property that doesn't have equity, you are literally on the cliff, and it could go either way.
What do you mean by buying a property you don't have equity or you have equity?
Okay, so for instance, one of the properties that we acquired was from AMCON, the government organization, right? And
they're selling a lot of houses.
They are selling a lot of houses, and
we've given you expo.
I know, and they're pretty easy to work with. So we purchased property, but luckily it was a distressed sale, and I can't go into detail about how AMCON works, but they have different categories of property and different price ranges depending on what they need to recover, right? The market value of the place or how much is being owed. And
because of a bad debt.
That's right.
A debt gone wrong.
Yes. So for those of you, I'm guessing anyone who watches Moneyline would know AMCON. That's why I just went on.
Asset Management Corporation of Nigeria.
That's right.
What it means.
Yes. And so they buy all the bad debts from banks, and then the banks are liquid, and then they sell in their own time the property, right? And sometimes if, for instance, the property is worth of 20, if they recovered just over 20, they've recovered for the loan, and then whatever their profit margin is to cover their running costs, right? So they're not necessarily trying to make a profit the way that an individual would. Don't quote me on this. But then not necessarily trying to make a profit the way an individual would. So they could sell a property that's valued at 40 for less because they just need to cover the costs and the debts. Absolutely. Yeah. So now, if you are able to purchase property from Amcon that's worth 40, will make 10 million because the street value of that house is 40, but you were able to buy it at 30. So that's what I mean about buying property equity. Yes.
Because we can go on and on with this class, property investing 101, or is it 202? But just before you go,
yes,
with all this grammar we've been speaking and all of it, some people may just be thinking, is it not for people that have money? This is really a poor country, or a country with poor people. Yeah. Can you really start with no money? I know you hinted a bit earlier on, I caught that. But can you really speak on that? Can you start with no money?
It's a good question. I get asked this a lot on my social media platforms. People say things like, oh, but I'm a youth corper, or I don't have any money.
I have a youth corper and he's watching you now.
Oh, really?
He's so interested. Okay. Take a look at him over there.
Okay, so let me start with the youth corpers. When I was in service, there was a youth corper who just joined as well, and I was asking him what he was going to be doing, you know, in general. And he said, I'm going to be selling property while I'm at my place of primary assignment. And I thought that was really interesting. He was like, well, I'm in Abuja, I'm going to be in a government agency, so already I have all these customers lined up. I'm sure I'm making more, right? So he was already in the property game as a marketer. So for people who are interested in property, you could start as a marketer with agents who already exist and have briefs. As the time goes, you start to learn how much property costs, size, location, etc. If that's an option for you as a you can do that. Another option, like I talked about, rent to rent. If you just have enough money to pay rent, you can, after speaking to the landlord, sublet and make money from that. They're like, I mean, in the book, I have like 16 different ways to get into property and to make money. But there's so many opportunities in property and so many places that people can, if they don't have any money, start. You could be a property photographer, right? If you have a great phone and you're enthusiastic, you can contact people and say, all your pictures online are dark, people won't be able to see your property, let me take pictures for you. And the more that you do that, the more you get involved. You know agents, you know owners, you know people who want to rent.
You're able to bank on your contacts.
And there's one that I usually when we talk about becomes quite a debate, but people can actually buy houses for free.
That will be another show.
I know.
That will be another show. Let's not get the cat out of the bag, and we've come to the end of the program. But I must say this so much money must say now to say you're going to gift us investing. Because this is not an advert for your book. It's just because the content is so rich.
Thank you.
You know, so for our super fans, we'll be gifting you that so you can, you know, to talk about, but you come back again. And Ngozi Okafor is an author. She's a content creator. She's a property educator. That's what I like to call her. So thank you again.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Welcome back. That's the wrap. It's a wrap. We're still in the holidays.